Switching on the call recorder now.
I just saw my back.
Yeah, that's that business of tidying up the office.
Close the station recovered, yes.
Good. Well, I haven't. I don't know if you want any background to the podcast or anything before we. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morning, whatever time of day it is where you're listening, Project Kazimierz listener. I've got a very special guest on the show today, Jon Powell. Jon, rather than me try to introduce you, which I would be able to because I've been on your LinkedIn, why don't you introduce yourself the way you would if you bumped into someone at a party or a networking event and they asked the question, "Hey Jon, what do you do?"
Thanks, Richard. First of all, kind of pleasure to be here. But yes, the dreaded or fantastic elevator pitch, depending on how you look at it. Jon Powell. I would probably describe myself predominantly as an enterprise educator. And what I mean by enterprise educator is someone that works to empower enterprise and entrepreneurial learning in others. So depending on who I'm working, who I'm meeting, I would describe myself in different ways. But an enterprise educator, someone that tries to empower and support others. I'm a bit of a portfolio worker. My day job is at Lancaster University, where I'm head of enterprise and innovation services. I'm chair of a national network within the UK called Enterprise Educators UK, which, surprise, is all about trying to support enterprise educators to support their learners. I'm director of the local Chamber of Commerce because I'm really keen on the city in which I work, which is Lancaster in the northwest of England. And I'm also a small business owner. I started my first company when I was a student studying here at Lancaster University, which is a HR consultancy. So I do try and tailor that question depending on who I'm talking to and what I think they want to hear or want to get from me or how I might be able to help them. But if I answer it in one sentence, I'd predominantly say I'm an enterprise educator. I try and empower the development of entrepreneurial learning in others.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction, and I very much do appreciate that. It would be slightly odd at a social party to answer the question that way, but it gives the main planks. And if someone asks, well, why do you do it? I mean, as someone who's devoted a really significant chunk of my life to entrepreneurship, I kind of get it for me, but. Yeah. Maybe your reasons are different, or maybe there are other people out there for whom entrepreneurship is like that's a sort of TV thing for there's enterprise things like Dragon's Den or famous Richard Branson or Elon Musk, and they don't necessarily think, they look at you and no offense, but they think is he really Elon Musk? And so if someone said, well, why do you do it? What if there was like one thing about entrepreneurship that effectively means you've decided to devote your working life to it? What is it that attracts you and makes you think it's worthwhile?
I'll try and answer that in two ways, Richard. I suppose why do it? I think why I do it is because it's really important. It's about unlocking the potential in others, so that they can have a positive contribution to society, to culture, to kind of economic impact. And I think enterprise entrepreneurship is a fantastic vehicle for unlocking that potential in others. So I suppose that's why I do it, but why do I do it? To some extent, I kind of fell into this journey. I was a typical student going to university, didn't know where I wanted to go. I got a part-time job, which was actually working with a self-employed chap in the city of Lancaster. We got on really well, and one morning I woke up and decided I'd try and convince him that he should stop being self-employed and we should start this business together. And for some reason, this 50-year-old man said yes to a 19-year-old kid. And so we decided to start a business together, which was a HR consultancy company, of which I'm not a HR practitioner and have no interest in being a HR practitioner. But I suppose reflecting, it always kind of fit quite well with my values around supporting people and kind of HR. So I was starting a business as a student at university, and so I tried knocking on a few doors and asking for a little bit of help from a university, and basically didn't get anywhere. There wasn't any help available at that time.
What sort of timescale is it? What time?
So this is 2001.
Okay, so good 15, 20 years ago. We're recording, by the way, we're recording this in 2019. And one of the interesting things about internet content is that someone could be listening to this in 100 years from now. So I should say that, and you're currently in a country called the United Kingdom, which if you look at your history books 100 years from now, might not.
Currently part of the European Union.
Which is currently part of the European Union, and the word "united" might be stretching the meaning of the word at the moment, without getting into the politics. And I'm in Poland, which is in the centre or east of Europe. But anyway, sorry, I slightly jumped in there just to give a context. So about 15, 20 years ago, you were knocking on doors, not getting anywhere, trying to get support in terms of grant funding or something like that, was it?
Just trying to get someone to hold my hand, give me a bit of advice rather than necessarily funding, Richard. But actually, you make a really good point in terms of what that initial business was all about. Was actually taking staff handbooks, which were you had to have one to be legislatively compliant with over 5 employees in the UK, and putting them online. That was basically the business model back then. So that when we were online, we could keep them up to date when legislation changes. So the companies didn't have to keep printing their staff handbooks whenever any change occurred. That was in essence the kind of premise, and yeah, when you think to where we are now, it does seem quite strange that 15, 16, 17 years ago that was quite novel, but it was. So that was a kind of driver. Knocking on doors, some of the feedback was even, don't bother, you're wasting your time, just get on with your studies.
Nice encouraging.
Absolutely. This was the top-ranked management school in the country at that time.
Sorry to cut in there, John. What were you studying? What was your?
I was studying an undergraduate degree in management at Lancaster University Management School, and as I say, I think it was just quite unusual then for students to be starting businesses. Things have changed fundamentally, and I'll come on to what that kind of landscape looks like now, maybe later. But eventually, I did get someone who thought I wasn't absolutely crazy. And actually ended up giving me access to the database of all the home addresses for every student studying at the university. So I wrote them all a letter and asked them if they were interested in starting a business, because I was, and do they want to help me on this journey? And that ended up in me starting the Entrepreneurship Society, so Student Society at the university, which was, we think, the first in the country at that time, and now pretty much every university, certainly in the UK, has a kind of entrepreneurship society. So I'll kind of answer the question in terms of why I think it matters, and that's why I'm really involved in enterprise education, because I went through that journey. I was a student looking to start a business. I saw it being a really positive thing, and back then it wasn't necessarily seen by the universities as being positive. And so since then, it's always been my mission to change that mindset, to change that approach. And actually, we're in a completely different place to where we were back then in terms of enterprise education and universities and colleges and schools in the education sector, whereas now it's very much seen as a positive destination. And we're starting to change the mindset that actually it's not just good because people are starting businesses, but it's also developing them and their potential, whether they go on to start a business or go into work in the private sector, small business, large business, public sector, it doesn't matter. An entrepreneurial workforce is a positive, contributing workforce that's going to make things happen. So that's a long-winded answer to why. So why? Because I think it's a good thing, and why me? Because of those experiences.
That's very interesting, and it's a very interesting parallel that one of the reasons I got interested in supporting entrepreneurship in schools was because there was so little of that when I was at school. I remember to this day there were 2 classes in my entire university and school education to do with entrepreneurship, and I remember them both quite well. And it's not the time to go into the detail, but I was teaching a new group in the MBA course, which is a weekend evening course for people who've got day jobs as an executive MBA. And it was a new group, and I was asking them why they thought I would be devoting my Sunday to teaching entrepreneurship, and I had time then to explain the whole story. But quite often it's doing something that was missing for you is quite a driver, because you're solving the problem that you're aware of as you go about it. But just to go back a bit earlier, and we'll get on to more about the details of your current activities in a moment and your business, which is very interesting. But when you were a teenager or growing up, you mentioned that you hadn't had this sort of sense you would be self-employed or start your own company until you just woke up one morning. So were your family, what were your sort of family influences? Because sometimes people say, yeah, my dad or my mum was an entrepreneur, so it was natural, but it doesn't sound like that was the case for you.
No, not at all. I didn't really realise it was a thing. It sounds really silly, doesn't it? But I wasn't aware of anyone that had started a business. I wasn't really, in terms of friends and family, wasn't aware of anyone that even worked in a small business. My mum worked in the public sector. My dad was a miner and then worked for a medium-sized engineering business. So small business never really entered my consciousness until university.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned there, Richard, in terms of experiences maybe in the classroom. I can't remember any experiences of school of being exposed to the entrepreneurship. The closest we got was around economics and buying and trading shares, which isn't about startups and kind of entrepreneurship. It was about the stock market. So no, it really was. It really was a kind of bang my head moment, I suppose. I knew about the theory of entrepreneurship when I got to university. There were courses on the theory of entrepreneurship, but they were certainly teaching about, not teaching for, and certainly not teaching through. So maybe that opened my eyes a little bit, but I could start a business, but it was never something I had exposure to, and never something that was a kind of lifelong dream or aspiration.
Okay, well that's really interesting. And for anyone listening to this, obviously the fact that someone's listening to this show suggests that perhaps they're interested in innovation and entrepreneurship, but there's no one history. Sometimes people who are quite often you look at entrepreneurs and they've had some difficulty in their childhood, or they come from a poor background or a very challenged background, or perhaps they're privileged but were kind of discriminated or bullied or whatever, and their drive to do something in their life is fighting against something, and so sometimes people who have the worst background have the highest level of motivation. At least you can observe that, and that's why sometimes immigrants make some of the best entrepreneurs. Like there's the famous Gary Vaynerchuk, came from a very poor Belarusian Jewish family that immigrated to the United States, and it was adversity that set him up for the work culture. But that doesn't sound but you had like sounds like relatively normal, and one day you woke up and thought but then you did this thing of persuading a 50-year-old to go into business with you, which is unusual. Although as someone who's 52, the idea of finding someone of more than half my age who's highly motivated, who could be a partner, could be attractive in terms of you can be aware you lack the energy as an older person. Not that I do, but this idea of sort of like getting a share of someone with tons of energy and their whole life ahead of them could be very attractive. But you obviously realised you needed someone else to do it. Why? And that sense of when the opportunity comes along is, I try and teach a sense of, there's a concept in the army of battle readiness, like being ready to go to war. And I teach and try to encourage people to think of being entrepreneur opportunity ready, in the sense that you need to be in good shape in terms of your finances and particularly your relationships, so that if an opportunity comes along, you're not in a situation where you say, "Oh no, I can't because I've got a jealous boyfriend, a needy girlfriend, I've got tons of consumer debt." But you were somehow in a conditions where you could persuade that guy that you were to go into business with him. But why did you need him? Why didn't you just go it alone? What was your sense there that you needed him?
Well, I certainly felt like I kind of needed, again, coming back to that point about opportunity, because lots of us have ideas all the time, but are they business opportunities? No, they're not, because if you've not got the right contacts, the right funding, the right knowledge, you're not in the right part of the country, all that. So unless everything falls into line, it's not necessarily an opportunity for you. And I think I needed Malcolm, my business partner, because he had the experience, the expertise, the reputation. He was a published author in this field. He had that credibility. And I think looking back now, it kind of does make perfect sense from his perspective. It just at the time didn't seem to make sense from my perspective. But we were a very good team. He had all that expertise, I had contacts. I had the energy. I was fairly smart, and I had the kind of nous and had the hard work and the time to kind of put into it, and to do the research, and some skills I'd obviously developed from my education, the research skills, etc. I was a good networker, I was a good communicator. So when I reflect now, of course, it does seem to make sense, but at the time, it seemed a little bit unusual. It seemed a little bit odd to me. And coming back, Richard, to your point earlier about where entrepreneurs come from, and of course at university we all study about how they're born or made, But and sometimes I think you're right. Adversity can really kind of make the individual there. And one of the common traits we do see around entrepreneurs is around that resilience, that drive to overcome challenges. Because if you're going to give up easily, then starting your own business is not necessarily the right thing for you. So that's one of the things when we work with students, graduates, or other people, it is trying to make sure they're aware that we really do need that drive and that resilience around kind of starting a business. And again, maybe that's something that Malcolm saw in me. I had that drive, determination, resilience. I was willing to graft, and as I say, had the kind of time to do it. So we did make a good team, but at the time it seemed unusual to me. But when I look back now, I can certainly see how that was possible. And of course, those diverse individuals with different skills, backgrounds, is what makes good teams. If we were all the same, then we wouldn't make a good team, and that's what you need from a kind of startup offering. So it was a fantastic experience. It's a small business. It's not a fantastic high growth. I won't kid you, but it's employed local graduates from Lancaster University. It's sustained itself for a number of years. It's something that I'm still really passionate about. Meet with the team on a regular basis. But I'm not necessarily in the business. I tend to work more on the business.
Yeah, well,
it was a great experience. It still is.
Yeah, no. I mean, the concept of working on the business, not in the business, is fundamental. And right now I'm mentoring a couple who, they're very much engaged in their business and being a bit puzzled about how they can scale it, which is it's very smart of them to be thinking about this. But I was saying one of the questions you have to ask is, if you're paying someone to do what you're doing, would you be making a profit at all? And if the answer is not, you've got a souped up job really, rather than a business, because it's not and also you can't sell it, because effectively if you're part of the business and you sell it, you have to stay part of the business. You can't, it's going to collapse. But that's a separate topic. You raised this age-old question: are entrepreneurs born not made? And I remember Shay, the director of the Centre for Entrepreneurial Learning at Judge Business School in Cambridge, where I did a short course over a decade ago, was saying that, when people tell him that entrepreneurs are born, not made, he says, well, what do you think I'm doing with my life? I'm teaching, if you're right, my life doesn't exist, I don't have a purpose. And, I think it's, the way I explain it is that there's two things, and I've discovered this very recently, just as I'm getting more and more engaged with people in business schools, not all of whom by any means want to be entrepreneurs. A lot of them are trying to set themselves up for life in big companies and multinationals, and partly to pay back the huge fees associated. But I say at one level it's a bit like running. Everyone's born with their natural athletic ability, from absolutely hopeless to naturally brilliant, with a kind of Bell distribution, a Gaussian distribution towards the norm of the average person. And you can take anyone anywhere on that curve, and with the right training and coaching, you can push them along a bit. But I think the thing that's more interesting is the idea of changing mindsets, which is because entrepreneurship isn't an individual game; it's a team game. And so, if you can get people aware of and I was quoting, there's a case of the First Circle in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's First Circle, where there's a guy who's being sent to a slave labor camp in the Soviet Union, and he says, I can invent a radio-controlled torpedo and contribute to the Soviet war effort. So don't send me to the slave labor camp where I'll die. Send me to a military research prison camp. And in fact, he doesn't have any of the skills, but he puts a team together. And that for me, the self-awareness that you don't actually need to be good at any one thing to be a successful entrepreneur, even in the domain of whatever it is, pizzas or stockbroking or whatever. Of course, it helps if you've got a core skill associated with that. But if you don't have that sales skills or that coding skill, and your first step is find someone who does have the skills, then that's very liberating, because then you realize, well, I don't need to be in anything to be an entrepreneur. Just need to have an awareness. The awareness that I don't need to be good at any one thing is part of it. So I think that sounds like. Yeah, but when you're teaching entrepreneurship, what do you? Because are you teaching mainly entrepreneurs or students? Who's your target group in your sort of entrepreneurship education role, or do you have multiple target groups?
So multiple target groups really. So I have a team here at Lancaster University, for example, and with an operational lead. So I don't spend much time in the classroom or working with students one-on-one anymore. I more create the environment for others to enable that to happen. I'd say it's mostly co or extracurricular. So actually a lot of what we're doing is trying to engage with the student body through various channels, whether it's trying to engage with them by using enterprise education to help with their employability. And a lot of the time, actually, the language can be really challenging, Richard. We don't always talk about entrepreneurship. We don't always talk about enterprise. We might talk about freelancing. We might talk about making money for your passions, interests, and hobbies. And we try and engage people that have that energy and try and put in place the support infrastructure around them so that they could, if they chose, channel that into a new project, a new social enterprise, or a new business. Because for us, it's not actually about the amount of businesses that we pump out of the university at the end of the day. It's about, as you said, it's about taking people on that journey a little bit. One part of the scale is moving them along so that they can go out, and whether it is to start a business now or in 5 years or just go into the public sector and be really brilliant at what they do and really creative and innovative. That's a kind of win for us because it's a positive contributor to kind of culture, society, and the economy. So different kind of channels, different activities. Sometimes there might be quite intensive startup boot camps, people that demonstrate an entrepreneurial intent. Other times it might be doing silly things like we have a 3D sweet printer and we do workshops around how you can use that and innovation and creativity around what sort of 3D sweets you can print for Valentine's Day and get people involved that way, and then say, okay, well, where could be a market for this? And just getting them to think about the things around them and how entrepreneurship plays a role in making life for everyone hopefully kind of better. And so we engage them in different ways. Sometimes it is supporting the curriculum and embedding something in the curriculum. We have a creative enterprise program where arts and social science students are going out and running an event for a community group, trying to raise money for a charity by running an event for our group. So we're going through the process of ideation, of planning, of making it happen, of reflecting. And so we're having an entrepreneurial experience while it's part of their curriculum. But we might never want to start a business. That doesn't matter. Again, it's going to move them on and help them with developing their self-efficacy and their kind of entrepreneurial capacity and mindset, even if it doesn't result in an entrepreneurial intent and an entrepreneurial startup outcome. So we do kind of multiple things, and actually, there's a thick end of that pipeline where we're engaging as many people as possible, and a thin end of the pipeline where we are supporting people with maybe tech startups and VC funding and introductions and all those sorts of things. But we work across that and kind of manage that whole ecosystem on campus and try and allow the university as a kind of anchor in the city to support that entrepreneurial culture wider in the city. So that's really the kind of next challenge. That's entrepreneurship 2.0 from a university and enterprise education perspective is, actually most universities are really getting a good handle on enterprise entrepreneurship education on campus, curricular and extracurricular. But how do we evolve that into engagement and engaging better with our local community and society around enterprise and entrepreneurship as a vehicle to do good? So that's where my focus is starting to shift, hopefully in the next few years.
Okay, so effectively you're available to all the faculties of the university to sort of inject entrepreneurship into the things they're doing anyway. So it could be linguists looking at translation, or it could be artists looking at commercializing how to do something with their art, or musicians how to make a business out of music, or comedians. It's right across.
Absolutely.
And that's really interesting. Now, is that unusual? And was what you're doing in Lancaster kind of pioneering? Is that something that's normal for every university in the UK, or are you a bit of an outlier and a sort of reference for what can be done? Because I have to say I haven't come across that here in Poland, and it certainly didn't exist in Cambridge many years ago when I was a student. Although that may have changed.
I'm sure it has. It's becoming the norm. And by no means would I say Lancaster is absolutely cutting edge on this. We've learned lots of good practice from elsewhere, and that's why networks, companies like Enterprise Educators UK exist, so that we can kind of share that good practice. And for EUK, the members are the universities are paying to join. The community are the enterprise educators at those institutions, and it's all about sharing practice to increase the scope, scale and effectiveness of those interventions, that enterprise education. So we're all learning from each other, and it's all very collegiate, which is fantastic, because I think lots of people that engage in this sort of activity and become enterprise educators have a fairly probably a similar value set, but we're doing it because we want to develop the potential of others, and we see enterprise as a vehicle for doing so. So Lancaster's good, but there's a lot of other universities that are very good too. And the mission of EUK is to shine a light on a good practice and to help bring others along on that journey, and celebrate and grow and influence policy, hopefully, so that there's even more strategic drivers for enterprise education at higher education, at further education college, and then hopefully more in schools, because that's something that's maybe behind other parts of the world. But I think at the university level, the UK is doing pretty well.
Yes, and I don't know whether in a few words, if you talk about the history of it, when did this start? Are there particular sort of landmark, because it takes some resources, right? I mean, it takes some resources and some sales skills to persuade, because it's all very well to say it's available, but the other faculties have to want it, or be compelled to do it, and being compelled isn't always the best the best way to create goodwill and success. So what was it, like a government policy at the centre, or was it some visionary vice chancellors or university directors who thought this really matters for the potential of our organisation, our university? And so where did this idea come from? Because it sometime between when I left and now, this obviously took hold.
Untypically, it's a bit of all of the above. So there has been a policy push, and that keeps being revisited on a regular basis. We've just been working with the all-party parliamentarian group for enterprise on a new report around enterprise education about how we can push on further. But yeah, there's been lots of kind of research and kind of policy of this over the years. But that policy's never been directive. It's never been to universities saying you must do this. But what it has been is it's been tweaking around the edges. We're asking to measure certain things at certain points, and of course, sometimes what gets measured and reported is then where the strategy follows. So that's been a lot of the direction in the UK, and also the emergence of things, organisations like Enterprise Educators UK, that's been running for about 14, 15 years. It started off as UK SEC, so it's all about kind of science and technology, but it's evolved across the campuses in the UK now. And actually, we've been looking at international links and looking at enterprise education and doing networks existing in other countries, in other parts of the world, like we do in the UK. We went out to Japan a couple of years ago. I'm going out to China in a couple of months to speak at a conference there. And at the moment, those kind of networks of kind of communities helping each other on the journey don't really exist. But we think it's been fantastic in the UK. The growth in the community, we have 2,500 to 3,000 people that engage with the UK in terms of whether reading the newsletter, attending events, coming to our conference every year. It's a growing community, and we think that can really help and happen in other countries. So we're trying to support planting those seeds and maybe helping the development of the community to drive themselves forward in other countries. Because we do get 50, 60 delegates come to our conference in the UK, international delegates come to our conference in the UK. So there's an appetite there, and there's an awful lot of great research, but there's not necessarily always the policy drivers. Or in China, there's a huge policy driver towards enterprise education. That's now mandatory. So there's almost a pull from China now. So they are trying to pull people in and pull experiences in to try and kind of support them to upskill their educators. So policy can work, but also the grassroots can be really, really powerful. It might just take a little longer to get there, but when it does get there, it's sustainable. Whereas policy is not always sustainable because you might have a change in direction.
Yeah, we have show notes, and so anyone listening to this look in the notes, and when it goes online, we'll add these. But we'll obviously have a link into Enterprise Educators UK and a link to your conference. But maybe you could do a little advert for the conference, because if this podcast can be just a tiny contribution towards spreading the word about what you're doing, that would be very valuable. And I'd love to think that someone shows up at your conference and learns something that they can apply somewhere at some stage in the future would be a terrific thing. So if you could do a little shout out for your conference now, and also maybe describe the sorts of people who really fit in and benefit from attending, and what the purpose is of always the why question. What the purpose is. I'm sure it's about spreading good practice because you've already mentioned that. But what sort of people show up and why should they come?
So my elevator pitch, of course. I'll just have to, if you, the eager-eyed amongst you just saw me look to my left. I was looking at my calendar so I could check the dates. So it's the 2019 conference is at Oxford Brookes University between the 4th and the 6th of September 2019. They'll typically, in terms of a conference, be 300 to 400 delegates. We're actually expecting it'll be a 400-ish delegate conference this time around. And as I say, it's quite diverse. It's mostly UK, but we're probably end up with 50, 60, 70 international delegates. Who attends? It's a mix of kind of almost three groups. It could be academic teachers, researchers, so people are predominantly teaching the curriculum about enterprise or entrepreneurship, or teaching through enterprise and entrepreneurship, mainly in the curriculum. It could be practitioners. So when we're talking about practitioners, we probably mean people that are predominantly working outside the curriculum. They may be startup advisors, they may be based in a careers service, they may be running an incubator at a university. So they're mainly outside the curriculum, but still supporting the development of enterprise learning in the students, graduates, or kind of local community. On the third group are the kind of influencers, so senior managers at the university or heads of department that have a portfolio around enterprise, entrepreneurship, innovation. And we've recently, actually the last conference in 2018, launched our fellowship, which is about accreditation. So it's peer-reviewed. Individuals apply for it, to get the letters after their name as an EUK fellow, and they apply against one of those three groups, against the academic, the practitioner, or the influencer, because we think that reflects our community. And so what's it about? You kind of hit the nail on the head, Richard. It is about sharing good practice, shining light on good practice. We obviously have international keynotes, national keynotes. We have parallel sessions of workshops where people can present their practice, present their research, present their results and their impact. And then we have the usual in terms of lots of people exhibiting their wares around enabling enterprise education, the tools, the simulations, the techniques. And other than that, it's about fantastic networking and lots of fun. And it's a really, really fun conference where people get to catch up with us, meet new people. And as most conferences in the kind of sector, a lot of it is actually about meeting someone from a different institution that has the same challenges and issues that you do. So you can buddy up, so you can exchange contact details. So you realise you're not on your own, and you've got someone to speak to that might be outside of your team, your group, around the challenge that you face and how you might be able to overcome it. So that's the power of the conference. That's the power of the network. And during the year, that network is supported by regular, roughly once a month, enterprise exchange events, which are thematic and hosted by our member organisations on a theme. It could be a creative enterprise, it could be the Tier 1 graduate entrepreneurship visa, something specific, something more general around enterprise education. So that's really the conference. If you're an enterprise educator, practitioner, academic or influencer, it's one not to miss.
And what is it expensive? Do you need to be fabulously wealthy to show up?
No, it's quite reasonable. We've not announced the pricing for this year. There's a discount if you come from a member organisation of the UK. So there's roughly a 25% discount if you work for one of those organisations. But it'll be in the region of sort of £500 to £700 for 3-day conference fees, and plus accommodation and kind of travel if you are travelling internationally, which is kind of on a par for the 3-day conferences of this kind of ilk. And there's the usual gala dinner, obviously all your food's included during the days, etc. But it's, as I say, it's one not to miss if enterprise education is really your thing. Yeah,
no, obviously if someone's devoting their professional life to it, these are opportunities to make what you do more, and it's sort of fun, but it's more importantly useful. It's going to improve the quality of what you do. No, well, that's very interesting. I'm just wondering whether there might. It's perhaps a conversation we could have another time. Whether what I'm doing might be something that I could improve by coming along. But that brings me neatly on. But that's maybe we won't do that now because I need to think a bit about that. But I'm particularly interested, and there's two areas that I've got interest in. One is the role of alumni of organisations in supporting entrepreneurship teaching. I've set up something called CAM Entrepreneurs, which is for alumni of Cambridge University who are in business. And the general background is noting that Europeans are much less good at mobilising alumni networks than Americans in general. And part of the problem is that in the UK it's seen very much as a fundraising. The reason to engage with alumni is fundraising, which is actually not a very nice meeting to attend. If you show up, and my dad used to teach in a university, and he said the atmosphere of the begging bowl takes the fun out of a party. And it's true. If you know that you're going to be tapped, whereas if you start with creating value for the alumni around the fact that you've got a shared interest with the other people from the place you studied, maybe not chronologically, very importantly, but around a shared interest, of course you feel better about that place and might be more generous in the long run. But one is in terms of mobilising alumni, and the other is the idea of entrepreneurs being actively engaged in the teaching of entrepreneurship. And the second one first, maybe. Do you have any observations about what goes well and badly when you get a businesswoman or a businessman who's keen to help, but they aren't necessarily a trained teacher, coming into a university classroom or school setting with good intentions, who has the objective of helping teach entrepreneurship? Do you think it works? And when it works, why does it work? And when it goes wrong, what goes wrong?
I think there's an enormous amount of value in it, in terms of engaging entrepreneurs in teaching, whether that's within the curriculum or outside the curriculum, in terms of adding value to potential startups or individuals on their journey. Tremendous value. The challenge is how you harness it in the right ways, so that it adds value back to that individual, but adds value to the learner too. So what a model that I have seen work very well, and actually Lancaster is a kind of good example of this, is having more kind of formalised mechanisms for those individuals. So we have a fairly large entrepreneur in residence programme with around about 40 to 50 entrepreneurs in residence. Now, coming back to your previous point around alumni, some of them are alumni of the university, but all of them are alumni of the university community. Mm-hmm. So they've probably received some sort of support from the university in the past. As a business owner, been on one of our leadership development programs, we've received support through one of our science and technology projects, maybe around virtual prototyping, just one example, or environmental science and low carbon. So we've probably received some fairly intensive support from the university and wanted more, and we felt as an institution they kind of fit with us. So we've invited them to become entrepreneurs in residence. And over time that's become a little bit more formal, so there's almost a kind of contract of understanding there, whereby entrepreneurs in residence would be expected to come in and contribute to the curriculum of X number of hours a year, would be expected to mentor particular students, if startup businesses, etc. And then alongside that we might do some kind of training and managing the expectations, because as I mentioned earlier, in terms of tremendous value, what really adds value to those individuals is real world experiences, challenge-based learning, and that's the sort of thing that your entrepreneur residents, if you coin that phrase, can really support with, because they can set real world challenges on their businesses. And if you've got a long-term relationship with the university, if it doesn't work out perfectly, they'll probably forgive you and they'll keep coming back. So the entrepreneur in residence sort of program has worked really, really well at Lancaster. I've seen good examples kind of elsewhere at other universities, Leeds being one. Leeds actually are fantastic at engaging their alumni and also asking them to open a checkbook on occasion, but doing that after having a long-term symbiotic relationship with that organisation. So those relationships can exist. They can be symbiotic. The business can really benefit from talented graduates, can really benefit from challenge-based learning of students working on particular projects and coming up with solutions that we may choose to implement or not. And the EIR model, I think, is a good way to kind of harness that relationship within a kind of framework and structure that is coordinated and managed by an individual or team at the institution. So yes, I think we really can have teaching, but I think it works best if it's done within that sort of framework. Otherwise, it's a little bit piecemeal. It depends very much on individual relationships, and academics move and then the relationship moves with them. For example, if you have something a little bit more formal that might have an element of induction and expectation, then I think you have a better long-term relationship for both the university and the external entrepreneur.
No, that's a very, very sort of full answer, and thank you for that. No, because one of the things I've noticed is that, you know, there's an event we do here called Krakow Enterprise Mondays, where we get there's certain sort of what you might call centre points of the experience, partly based on my experience in the TEDx community. It's short presentations on the basis that people's attention spans have really shrunk these days, and it's not going to be successful. You give people a 40-minute lecture usually these days. So you say make it short, and then it's speaking to a format. And the danger of just giving an entrepreneur the microphone is that if they're not, you know, with the best of intentions, if their business is based around, I don't know, making promotional playing cards or whatever it is, people don't show up to hear about that. And because it's that guy's life, the danger is he's going to talk way too much about the specific thing his business does, which the audience aren't potential customers. So it's not that interesting. But if it's more about the process, it's like, so the typical 4 questions we ask are like, who are you? What do you do? What lessons have you learned? And what advice would you give a student? You know, then that's a sort of insurance policy against a sort of a guy who's going to just show off about, you know, and it's obviously and the other thing is, like, in terms of format, is what we call the office hours, where this is something I learned from someone else's conference, a Poland 2.0 conference, where all the speakers get a table, so that people who are shy there may be people who want to ask questions, but they're a bit shy to ask a question in front of everyone because they don't want to look stupid in front of their classmates, or that because they might ask a very simple question. But if they can meet people one-on-one around a table, or then they'll. So you make the entrepreneurs presenting accessible. So partly it's format in terms of what they talk about. Sometimes it's like literally the ergonomics and design of the event space is critical. And then the other thing is. Sometimes saying teach to a curriculum. So don't just say talk about whatever you want to talk about, but tell us about fundraising, tell us about sales, tell us about hiring, because they've got, as you said, the real world experience that they can deploy. So they know the theory, maybe they don't, but it's actually very credible. So that's one thing. And in terms of the alumni network, do you share my feeling that this is a sort of underutilized, under-tapped resource? Do you think just taking Lancaster, just if you speak your own personal experience, are you and the Careers Office actively reaching out to alumni, and does it work? And if it does, how do you make it succeed?
Just to kind of answer the previous point about answer that question, Richard, I agree in terms of the kind of pedagogies and the way you set up the room are really, really important. And actually, we've taken almost the same technique. Pecha Kucha presentation, 6 minutes, and then go and sit on the table. That does work really well. So you know, I would absolutely kind of concur with that. And that's something I learned many years ago, and I've rolled out over and over and over again because it's so impactful. In terms of actually, I was going to make another point there as well. The one lecture that did stick in my head, now this was within the curriculum around entrepreneurship, was a lecture on failure. There was an entrepreneur sat there on the edge of tears for nearly 50 minutes talking about how it all went wrong. Mm. And that was fantastic, absolutely amazing. It was almost heartbreaking to watch, but absolutely fantastic. And you know, it wasn't in any way intended to put you off, but it was intended to just kind of highlight, you know, what went wrong in that individual circumstances, what you need to be prepared for, to think about holistically when you are thinking about starting a business. It was a fantastic lecture, actually. Not necessarily something I do on a startup boot camp, but was really good in the curriculum, and that was definitely within, I can't remember what the course was, but definitely fit within the kind of course program and the learning outcomes. Sorry, so answering the question around alumni, yes, I think I agree. From what I've seen of the European universities and certainly the UK universities, most of them, we are great at engaging our alumni on the enterprise education agenda. Unfortunately, most universities, the way they set up is they will have an alumni team who feel that they own and manage all of those alumni relationships, and they will have a series of KPIs, which, funnily enough, are usually linked to money. So it can be very difficult. So it's difficult for us to circumvent that unless we've got our own kind of relationships, and even then we're kind of expected to engage with the alumni team, which we do. Well, you know, we do work very closely with them. But unfortunately, having one of those strategic drivers, which is around raising money, means that is the top priority. So the top priority is, other people may say it's about the long-term relationship with that individual, but as soon as you start asking them to open the checkbook, then I think you kind of lose a lot of them along the way. So from the enterprise education perspective, then we do have a group of mentors that we utilise. Many of them are alumni of the university. Most of them, if they're alumni of the university, they're alumni of our service. So the people that we've supported that have gone on to start a business, that are happy to give up their time to then work with the students and graduates now, because they're 5-10 years down the line. And they're usually the more impactful case studies than your Elon Musk or your Richard Branson. Because how on earth can I get there? But I can be Dave, who was studying environmental sciences last year, who's running his own business. I could be Dave. So yes, we utilise alumni that way. But I think overall, as institutions in the UK, I think we could be better. But I think, this is a personal opinion, I do think that then having the strategic driver that there is a pound sign attached to that KPI does mean that tends to be what the relationship is seen as being beneficial to the university from the university's perspective, not about kind of giving back into the university in other ways. Whilst, of course, we do, but as soon as you attach a pound sign to it, that becomes the first thing people look at on your KPI dashboard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I completely sign off on everything you said there, John. But apart from that, one of my little lifelong irritations is this concept of giving back, because giving back implies I took away, and I would say that particularly in entrepreneurship, if you created a product, you paid your tax, you created jobs, you risked a lot. Yes, it's sharing your good fortune if it works out, but it's not giving back. It's not a cake you took a slice out of.
So when I say giving back, I'm not really. But giving back is time, is expertise, is helping people. So when I talk about giving back, I don't mean money, but that's what probably, if you spoke to someone in an alumni team, that would be the first thing.
I know it's exactly the language. It's the language they use, but the other thing that we've got time. We've got about another 10 minutes now, because we booked for 5, and that's the. But there are a couple of other things. One is the challenge of the difference between the journey and the snapshot. That one of the values of mixing up alumni who are at different stages of the entrepreneurial journey, and entrepreneurs who, again, like entrepreneurs aren't all a single entity. You get the guy who's really struggling and the woman who's fabulously successful and wealthy and has already made it and sold 2 companies. But it's quite a challenge when you're teaching even a body of students that their starting points are so different that for some of them they may have already have a stall on Kickstarter, a stall on eBay, and be a success. They're in business already and interested in developing, and other people, have yet to consider even starting. And how do you? And equally among the alumni, you might get some very talented, hardworking person who spent 20 years in the police, has had a good career in the police, but had that feeling, I want to go into business now, and she's had a great professional training, but they aren't at the beginning. They're right at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey, and someone else who might be younger but more experienced. And how do you deal with that difference in starting point if you're going into environments with sort of like entry level courses? Because it must be quite a challenge for you sometimes.
Diagnostic approach is really the kind of key. So in terms of our service to our students, our graduates, our staff, the first thing we do is sit down with them one-on-one and try and understand where they're at on their journey and where they think they need help. And then we have a kind of suite, a menu, an a la carte and a buffet that people can choose from, so they can engage and just come on something intensive over 2 days, and that is kind of off the shelf. Most of our deliveries is more the kind of a la carte. People, we do a diagnostic, we recommend they engage with X, Y and B, and then they can kind of choose and engage in that way. So it's not a set path for everybody that's engaging with this support, because nobody's the same. The ingredients are all the same, but you might end up with slightly different dishes. And so that's how we try and take the time to unpick it, do that diagnostic with the individual, try and work out where they are. Where they are can just be, first of all, understanding what their values are, and is this a good fit, and start to look at the idea behind the business and whether it's an opportunity and the value proposition and all of those sorts of kind of business model canvas type kind of concepts. So it is very bespoke to the individual. No one student, graduate, member, staff engaged with that service no two will get the same support. It will be completely unique to them. We'll try and identify a mentor or a coach, depending on whether we think we really need mentoring or coaching, that's got the right sort of sectoral experience that they can relate to. We might even do, in some cases, some kind of disc profiling and personality and trying to line up people from that perspective too. So it's about trying to tailor that experience to the individual. A huge change that has enabled us to do that only in the last year, because we used to have to offer more off-the-shelf service, which, around boot camps and being more specific, is we didn't have any space for our team and our service. We had to book spaces on campus, and that really limited what we could do and how we could do it. We've subsequently actually rented a retail unit from the university. So I'm a member of staff from the university renting a space from the university to run my service for the university, which is a bit crazy, but it's only £30,000 a year, and that's the most high-profile retail unit on campus. And so everything we do happens in there. We're creating a community hub around it. It's called Work in Progress. It's all glass windows, really highly visible. So people can't help but see us. They can't miss us. They know how to engage. They know where to come in. They're dropping sessions at the same time every week. They know where to find us. They know where the delivery is going to take place. They know where they can book the space for their project meetings, etc. So having that kind of physical hub, whereas we used to have to run it as more than a kind of electronic hub and community, has made a big difference. And actually, the first, pardon me if the statistics aren't 100%, but I think it was in the first 6 weeks of this academic year, we had the same number of people engaged with our service than we did in the whole of last year.
That's interesting. I'm just wondering now, I'm thinking out loud whether there might be room for something like what we have, Open Coffee Krakow, but I might send you a link to that as something that I might come over at the end of this year and do a pilot and see whether a pilot, if you've got a space. But I don't, in the remaining minutes, I want you to talk, so I might follow up. I'd like you to talk just briefly about your business, because there's a couple of final questions. One is what your biggest challenges are, and what you're going to be doing in 5 or 10 years' 5 or 10 years' time, if things go the way you want them to go. The other thing is what your business is like, what scale it's at, and what your plans are for that. Will you exit it, or might it be $1 billion company in 5 years' time, or what? And those are 3 questions, but if you could take them in whatever order you like.
I'll try and link them, Richard. I suppose I'm quite clued up in terms of what my values are and what kind of matters to me, and I do try and spend a lot of time kind of thinking and planning. So the whole adage around business, don't plan to fail, don't fail to plan. So I apply that to myself and do life orbits on a regular basis. So I'm really well suited to being a portfolio worker. I like to be doing lots of different things. I could not just have a job at work. I'm not even sure I could be tied down with one business. So the other thing that's really important to me, as I've touched on a few times, is unlocking the potential of others. So even if I'm not looking at the whites of their eyes and actually coaching someone individually, though of course I do that, everything that I try and do is about trying to create the environment so that my teams can provide the best possible service to their customers and clients around enterprise education, around consultancy support at the university, etc. So for me, actually, where do I want to be in kind of 5 years' time? I want to be doing more of the same and enabling that in more people, so increasing the kind of scale and scope of that sort of activity. So I'd want to be involved with EUK or a similar organisation that's enabling that and sharing best practice. I'd want to probably still be working in a university setting in some degree, because I really like the university kind of setting, but I'd definitely be wanting to do some other kind of private sector challenges, maybe some other new businesses. I've got one I'm working on at the moment, which is a sports kind of rental business. So I would want to be a portfolio worker, because that's really what kind of makes me tick. What I'd probably like to do more of as well is on the policy driving kind of area. So through EUK and other organisations, I want to try and be influencing policy a little bit more. I've got coffee with one of the Lords at the House of Lords next week, who's actually our patron, Lord Callum Villamore, who's the chairman of Cobra Beer. So he was also heading up that APBG and kind of entrepreneurship.
You must mention the Cambridge link there, because he gave a talk in my college at Cambridge. I remember say he gave a great speech. I remember his speech from 30 years ago very well. Tell him, but do pass that on.
I will pass that on. I think it's next week I'm actually meeting him. So it's really that's something I'm really passionate now is trying to capture all these experiences and try and help shape future policy. Because the UK is a great, at the moment anyway, within the European Union, disclaimer, is a great place to live, work and play, but still has an awful lot of potential. And so, driving policy is something that's really, really important to me. I have an interest in politics, so maybe there might be something around kind of politics in the future as well. But portfolio working, really, because I like working in large organisations. I like starting businesses. I like working in change-based organisations that try and drive policy and drive development in that area. And I don't think I'd want to give up any one of those three things. So I'm the sort of person who doesn't need to fit into a box. And I think I'll still be about the same person, but I'll make sure I take the time to regularly kind of reflect on my values, reflect on my kind of life orbit, and make sure that that's still kind of making me holistic and kind of happy. But at this point in time, Richard, I think that'd be it. It'd almost be like more of the same, maybe supercharged.
And any challenges anything that you're struggling with at the moment that anyone listening maybe can help you with, or is there anything that's difficult that is particularly bugging you now?
So anyone who can help with that policy perspective, anyone that can help internationally in terms of good practice of enterprise education or enterprise and innovation support at universities, sharing good practice there, would be really keen to hear from people. But also, I suppose, if anyone wants to kind of contact me, I get a lot out of helping others. You probably worked that out by now. So I like to try and help people, obviously managing expectations about kind of fitting it in, etc. But yeah, any of those kind of areas around learning from you and sharing good practice, I'd be really keen to talk to people around enterprise education, around enterprise innovation support at universities, whether that's commercialisation, consultancy, those sorts of activities, because they sit under my remit and interest area too. I touched on the kind of policy perspective, but of course I've asked people to look up the conference, and if you are an enterprise educator, try and engage with that conference and come and see me there and buy me a beer.
What a good way to end. Jon, this is actually, interestingly for our listeners, this is the first conversation we've ever had. We've literally never spoken to each other before today. I feel like, it's almost like we're soulmates from different parents. But the rationale of this whole podcast is to have an interesting conversation with people doing interesting things and then share it with a wider audience. So I'd almost say this is a reference interview, a reference conversation. I'm really pleased with it. I'm sure we're going to stay in touch. And all I can say is both from myself, Richard, here in Krakow in Poland, and from all the Project Kazimierz listeners, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much.